I always love the 10 a.m. artist talk crowd because y'all are like the most hardcore. Waking up early on a Saturday morning to come talk about art, you're my favorite kind of people. I'm Emma Saperstein, I'm the curator here at the Museum of Art. We're all a little bleary-eyed this morning because we had such a fun time partying and celebrating Alicia's opening last night, which was awesome. It was so fun and so well attended and so fun to hear the community's response to your work and their questions and curiosities, so I'm excited to dive deep this morning. I want to thank our exhibition sponsors, which I have a sheet, the wall text right there, Lindsey, Harn, and Christie's Real Estate, and lots of extra support from Hotel Cerro, where Alicia and her family have been staying this week and enjoying the pool, and KSBY in the city of SLO. So thank you to our sponsors who support this show. Hurrah. Clap, clap, clap. This morning is pretty informal, so I hope that as Alicia's sharing a little bit more about her work, you come up with questions and curiosities that we can talk about after. So she has a 20-ish minute artist talk with slides that I'm really stoked on. And then she and I will have a little conversation with my questions. I get to ask them first, and then I hope that we can all engage in a dialogue together after that. I want to read her bio because it's very impressive. Alicia Adamerovich was born in Latrobe? Yeah. Latrobe, Pennsylvania, and lives and works in New York. She studied art and design at the Maryland Institute College of Art and Pennsylvania State University. Her recent solo exhibitions include presentations at Cone Gallery in LA, where Dorian is here, drove up this morning, 6 a.m. to be here this morning. Panget, Del Valle projects, many others. She's participated in group presentations at Timothy Taylor, Rachel Effner, Mrs. Gallery, Lafayette, Anticipations, etc., etc., etc. The list is very long. She's the recipient of the 2022 LCA Prize for Emergent at Maya and Milan and has had residencies at Del Valle Projects, LA, Molly Sabata Artist Residency, Palazza Monti in Brescia, Italy, and Hayama Artist Residency in Japan. Her work is in the permanent collections of the Institute of Contemporary Art in Miami, among others, and this is her first solo museum exhibition. Lucky us!
First, thank you all for coming. I was just going to talk a little bit about my background and then a little more about the show with Emma afterwards, but this is my show I titled Conundrums, and it's essentially about questions more than answers. We'll get a little more into that later. I always like when people start off with a childhood drawing, so this is from when I was 3 years old, and I thought the fingers were really impressive, so.
What age?
3. Yeah. My dad, he didn't come today, but he taught me how to draw, and, you know. This is from 4th grade, and I think it actually is very telling to what I do today, so I kind of never really got over that lesson on perspective and shading, so I just like to include that. Even though I've always been into drawing and art, I also have always been interested in nature and biology and science. My mom was a biologist when she was younger, and then she also taught life sciences. She's here tonight. That's Lynn. So she always encouraged me to do both, and she said I'd figure out what I wanted to do later. And so, like the year after, right when I graduated high school, I got accepted into this program in our hometown called the Loyalhanna Watershed Association's Youth Conservation Corps, and it was really cool. We essentially just were outdoors all summer. We fixed up different hiking trails, and we got to go kayaking, and we got paid for it. And we just did nature things. It was really amazing. And then I went to art school after that. I went to MICA and I thought I wanted to study scientific illustration originally, and I actually ended up transferring to Penn State after a while, after about a year and a half, just, I just couldn't decide what I wanted to do, financial reasons, and randomly our apartment got broken into in Baltimore my freshman year, and I think I had a little nervous breakdown, but so I transferred to Penn State and I actually studied design there and worked as a designer in California for a few years after college. And then eventually I decided it wasn't exactly what I felt like I needed to be doing, and I moved to Brooklyn, New York, because I had friends there who were doing all kinds of creative things, art and design and music, anything you could think of, really. And I kind of lived for a few years doing illustration work. I used to draw things for like the New York Times and Bloomberg Business Week, HBO, like whatever big brands you can think of. And it was fun for a while. It was really hard to even make my really, really cheap rent with 3 roommates doing that. But I worked in my bedroom like this for a long time. So this was how I did that for like a couple years while I started figuring out my actual art practice, and which I also started in my bedroom. For a while I was only making graphite drawings, which you'll see later, or there's a few examples on the back wall, and when I started showing work, that's kind of all I was doing at first. I got asked to make a zine in like 2018 with a press in Switzerland called Neves Press. Oops, sorry. And so at the time I was kind of drawing these anthropomorphized crops that were based off of furniture, and I was really into them feeling kind of sinister and like these creatures in a way. So this zine is called Stool Sample. And I think that was when I first started getting really into titling work as well. So that was a cool project that I think got me moving in a direction. Right before the pandemic happened, I feel like a lot of shows started happening, and I was starting to get a lot of offers for things and accepted into residencies, and then 2020 hit and everything got canceled and postponed. So in 2021, everything got rescheduled kind of all at once, which was rather intense, but also really exciting. So I went on residency first in Italy at Palazzo Monti, and it was really cool. It's like this palazzo, and you stay in it, and you get a room to work in it as well, and then you can show work in it as well. It was in Brescia, Italy, which is kind of like a more industrial town near Milan. So I didn't do it, but some people would kind of work, like explore with like marble and like other like stone materials, which is a lot cheaper to do in Italy than here. But at the time I was too broke to even explore it, so I painted. And then right from there I went from Italy to France for 2 months to a different residency back to back called Molly Sabata. It was kind of strange because it was still very pandemic times, and in Europe, each country had its own strict rules. Italy they had a curfew, but nobody obeyed it, basically. Everyone pretended and like snuck around at night. And then when you got to France, it was actually very strict, and you had to have like paperwork, and you would get like fined if you were out past, I think like 7, which, the French don't eat till 9 or 10, so people were really upset by it. Also, when I had to travel from Italy to France, there was all the 2 different kinds of COVID testing happening, and I apparently got the wrong one because they call them something different in Italy, like even the translation is different. So the residency director was like, don't worry, and he just photoshopped me a version of it. And he's like, but he said they won't care because they can't read Italian in France. So and he was right, it worked. So I was in France, and this was like my live workspace, which was really amazing. I honestly was the coolest place I've ever worked. So it was just this huge thing with like this loft that I slept in, and I just made a big mess and then woke up to the mess and then went to sleep to the mess every day. And that really I think it was the most space I had as an artist to really expand my practice, and it really it was really life-changing for me. And I was working on a lot of woodworking there and finding ways to do things with very minimal tools because I couldn't bring everything because it doesn't work there on their power system. But that's when I kind of started developing the system of stacking wood and then carving down the sides, which I actually have done for the pieces in the back here, and you'll get a better look at those later, but this is how they're constructed as well. Oops. And then for these 2 residencies, I basically made work for my first show in Europe, which was A Bat Out of Hell at Gallery Saint-Tite. So this was in like the summer of 2021. It was a very small gallery, but I was exploring a lot of these like carved frame works, as well as more of this furniture type sculpture that has kind of an anxious and sinister feel to it. This show is a lot about anxieties, and I did these kind of wall works that were like a hybrid of sculpture and drawing. Later in the year, I had one more residency at Del Vaz Projects in Santa Monica, California, which was a totally different vibe. It was like staying at this guy's house that was Shirley Temple's childhood home. And he's a really amazing curator named J. Ezra Nassan. Is that how you say his last name? Yeah.
Co-curating a project with me for SLOMA in 2029.
Yeah, come to it. It'll be amazing. But yeah, he's the best, and you essentially live at this house with him and his partner, and they have like chickens and geese and rabbits and cats everywhere. So you're just like in a little mini farm, but like in Santa Monica. So you can just walk to the beach and then come back to this little farm. And then I worked in the garage all day for like a month and a half and finished up this show, which I called Second Nature, where I kind of continued upon both painting and then more of these kind of hybrid furniture sculptures, as well as these sculptural wall works, which are pastel, and then this one's plywood, but just like these simple overlapping forms. And then the next year, I had a big show in Montreal at Gallery Ponget called Ultra Gentle Manipulation of Delicate Structures. And I really loved this show. I kind of was exploring these like scaffolding-like structures that I wanted to feel very like complicated but like delicate but strong at the same time. Because I'm always looking for kind of like these contrasting feelings and terms that like, and how do I show both at the same time in a way? And the title for this show actually came from this, I read an article about this fettuccine like robotics thing that was developed and used to basically collect like jellyfish and underwater sea creatures that are very fragile, So it was using like a robotic, very stiff, or what you would think of as, when I think of robotics, I think of like stiff and cold and hard mechanics, but they developed this system of like inflating these fingers so they could softly pick something up, like very gently. And I just thought that was a nice thought and almost metaphor for what I was thinking about with the show, which was just like these structures that kind of represent these softer feelings in a way. So there's that. And then in 2023, I had a show at Michael Cohn Gallery, which was a really big point in my career. It was called This Is the Time of the Hour. And I started really building up the surfaces of my paintings at this point, and then also the first time starting to add sculptural elements into the paintings. So I'm always kind of working with this push and pull between sculpture and painting, and kind of blurring the lines between the two. And I don't know, I can just never decide whether I want to be a sculptor or a painter, I guess. Yeah, and so you can see in the background is the one piece that's here, and then this was like the sister piece for it, which was bigger. But these two works are good examples of how my dad, in Pennsylvania, he finds me pieces of wood that are either like deformed with the burls, like these ones, or just that grew in such a strange way. And usually they're fallen trees or trees that he can tell are dead and about to fall, and then he saves them for me. And like once or twice a year, I go and like pick them up and bring them back to my studio, and then they sit in my studio for like 2 years drying out. And eventually they tell me what they need to be, and these two were like these maple trees, which I didn't know they were until we started carving them, and they smelled like pancakes, which was really nice. Yeah. And more like of these hybrid pieces that I was exploring. These are the photos my dad texts me whenever he sees a piece of wood. They're very blurry. But I always like just waking up to like a text like this with like no message. And he doesn't really text, so to see a photo come from him, you're like, what is going on? That same year, I was able to participate in a really cool group show at this foundation in Paris called Lafayette Anticipations. It was, to this day, still one of the coolest shows I think I've ever been in. It had a lot of great artists in it, and it was really spooky. Yeah, it was like 3 levels of this foundation with the ground, like a big hole, like the main area was open all the way to the top. And this work was on the top floor. So it was the only room that actually had nice natural light. And then everything else was kind of in these dark, shadowy spaces. And you sort of work your way from the ground floor all the way to the top, and then you like come out and there's light at the top, which, I don't know, I like the whole experience of that flowing through the space, and that really, I feel like, impacted me, and is something I would love to be able to play with more in shows. Yeah, there was really cool stuff in it. And then there was this video floor too. It was a really great show. Around this time then, I started getting really into these like geometric, mathematical drawings. And honestly, I'm terrible at math, so it's not like I even understand the math behind them, but I bought a lot of books on just the drawing diagrams that come out of all of these physics patterns, and there's something about the balance and the like pulsating growth that comes from like fractals and other types of, I think they call it sacred geometry, where it creates this like balance in the universe, and some people believe that like it can kind of, I don't know, it's like almost like a philosophy in a way. And I don't know, I'm not really religious, or I don't know if I'm into that half of it, but I like the idea of it, and like how these forms show up in nature, and like you don't think of nature as being geometric, but a lot of it really stems from these forms. So I feel like I started bringing some of this stuff into my work, as well as building up a lot of the textured surfaces and almost this like layered pointillism effect I started doing as well around this time. And yeah, I feel like it bleeds into some of the work in this show as well. But these are some examples of just kind of that starting to take effect in my work. And I feel like that a lot of my New York solo show in 2024 took a lot of influence from reading a lot about that kind of stuff. So this was my show called Rude Awakening, which I made basically leading up into the election, which actually moved my show up, I think, like 2 weeks, because it was supposed to be like right around the time of the election, and it just seemed like way too chaotic, and people were gonna be like upset. So we decided to separate it a little bit. Yeah, so this show is a little bit about me kind of dealing with just kind of coming to terms with the, the chaos and disappointment and everything going on in kind of the world and the government, and everyone just feeling really overwhelmed and stressed. And, I kind of feel like we thought that would kind of die down, but it's maybe like 10 times worse now. But yeah. And then I also started, kind of playing more with the canvases. Like this one I drilled a hole through, and then it kind of just went into darkness, which is a little hard to tell here, but I like to have some of those little visual things that you won't really notice in a photo, but you will just kind of see if you come to the show in person, which I think makes things a little special for whoever makes it out. After this, Chris and I got accepted to a residency together in Japan, which Chris is my husband, also sitting here. He's also an artist. It's the first time we ever went on residency together, which was really cool. And we got to spend a month in Japan and basically just sightseeing in Japan, because they didn't require us to make any work. It was more research-based, which I would highly recommend research residencies. Very fun. And then this is beside us over here is the other resident that came, Kadar Brock, which we didn't know until it was time for the residency, but he literally lived down the street from us in New York. So we went with a neighbor on residency. We shared a cab home from the airport too. And then earlier this year, Chris and I actually had our first show together, which was at Clubhouse Gallery in Wellington, Florida, which is something we'd been talking about for years, but we kind of just waited for the right time. And the guy, John, who runs this gallery, he was here yesterday, but he just really liked both of our work separately, and we felt like that was what was needed for us to do a show together, because we just wanted it to be like where we could kind of do what we wanted, and they would trust both of us in the same way. And so we did that, and that was really fun. This is some of my work from it, but this past year, Chris and I also both did this, not really like a workshop in Pittsburgh called Rivers of Steel, and it was basically they take some of the old steel mill furnaces, and like these two artists sort of took over one and turned it into like an arts metalworking place, and we did like this week-long iron pour intensive, and we got to like carve or like sculpt with wax and create you can do whatever you wanted really, and they just help you like figure out how to make the molds and everything for it. And it was a really cool experience. So I made some iron poured cast pieces. This is one of the
Fingers in the third grade.
Yeah, it's the
H3 drawing.
Yeah, the fingers are always coming back. Fingers and the fettuccine like grippers. And then, so these are some things I'm kind of like, I'm still working on these pieces now, and it's kind of leading into my next body of work that I'm trying to get through this summer. This is more inspiration for that, which my mom's classrooms when I was growing up for her biology classes she always had these like specimen jars, and I still think about them all the time, because I don't know, I remember being like 5 and being like obsessed with these specimen jars, which are kind of creepy, and I wish she still had them. But yeah. And so I've been thinking a lot about these, and also I'm pregnant now, so there's some kind of there's something about all these like pregnancy documentaries I've been watching too that kind of feel the same. And I've just been thinking a lot about just the kind of this mystery of like what's going on inside of me when I can't see it, and like what that does psychologically to myself and to Chris. And I'm kind of it's kind of giving me a lot of inspiration at the moment, and yeah, I'm hoping to make some things before I get too big to be able to do anything. And that's it.
Hi. Great job. Thanks. I'm going to actually go back to this photo of you working in your bedroom.
Oh, yeah.
Which is far away. Here we go, on a journey. It's towards the beginning, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's coming. Oh, I think it's there.
There we go.
Yeah.
And I'll just ask a couple of questions. I have 4 on my list, but I want to leave room for all of y'all. Because you said the work, initially when you first started making work, that the work it emerged from your bedroom, you were working in your bedroom, and then later when you were talking about the residency in Italy, going asleep to the mess and waking up to the mess. And I think I have this conversation a lot with artists, especially locally, who struggle to find studio space or feel limited by their homes and the immediate small environments that they're working in. And then I talk to other artists who feel like the intimacy and overlap between their intimate spaces of residence and their art practices is actually really healthy and dynamic. So I'm wondering if you can speak to how that's evolved in your practice over the years. And a lot of the works feel actually quite intimate too, and you talk about anxiety and sort of deeper emotional feelings, and I'm just curious if you can speak to that a bit.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, at this time especially, I couldn't afford a studio yet. So I think, especially in New York City, that's like the main driver of whether you have a studio or not, or a home studio or whatever. And it wasn't until I started getting kind of a little more gallery support and being able to support myself a little bit better that I could finally move to a basement studio at first. And then I eventually had a window. But there are, even throughout that time, like I loved having a separate studio space, I think because it felt like I was like growing and just having more space, you can leave more stuff out at once. Whereas like at this time I'd have to like put stuff away and not have it on my bed to go to sleep. But then at times there were things I missed about this time when I did work in my bedroom, like staying up really late drawing, which once I didn't have a studio at home anymore, I try to keep like more daytime hours and like have slightly a bit of a schedule. But there's something so nice about drawing really late at night. And sometimes there's nothing else like it. Some of my best ideas would happen then. Now I kind of feel like I just have like the ideas and I have to hold on to them till the next day till I get to the studio. But recently, Chris and I just moved out of the city, so I'm returning to a home studio, but I get a different room than my bedroom to use for it and a garage. So it's like, I think, a better balance, and I'm honestly like kind of loving it again because you can just take your coffee in there sometimes and like get to work, which takes like a few hours before you can get there if you have a separate studio sometimes, because you're like, well, what do I need for the day? And like, I better eat breakfast. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. There's something about the early morning that brings a different type of creativity too, where I'm like just waking up and I'm like the sharpest I am probably for the whole day. So I don't know. I feel like there's beauty in both of them in a way. And I actually think it's good just to switch up studio space every couple years. I think that gives me a lot of energy and like, it's like reinvigorating or something.
It brings me to my next question about, you talked about the limitations of not being able to bring all your woodworking equipment to Europe with you, yes, and how directly from those limitations, this new method in your practice emerged. The layering of the wood in this specific way. I was just doing critiques with Cal Poly students who kept talking about, one student in particular kept using the word failure, like, I was trying to do this, but I failed. I was trying to do this, but I failed. Yeah. And I was like, I'm gonna invite you to reframe that word for yourself and for your practice, because look at all the failures that led to this new body of work. So I'm wondering if you can speak to limitation and failure and how that has evolved your practice over the years.
I always kind of tell Chris that I'm like a fake woodworker, and I kind of just construct things together like a 5-year-old would, instead of like someone who actually knows how to build structural things, because Chris actually does know how to make things structural, and he's like no, and so does my dad. So my dad was just like, well, why are you doing it like that? And I think it's kind of nice that I never properly learned how to do any of it, because I think it's just, my mind doesn't want to be like pushed into like the rules. I want to like just do things and try them until something doesn't work. And I think that's like more of a sense of tinkering that works for me. And then same with painting, like I was drawing, and then I feel like I was doing woodworking, and then I kind of slowly started painting again. And I feel like I paint with oil, but I don't paint the way certain oil painters would that really know the mediums and really know oil painting, like everything about it. I only know how to paint the one way that I paint, which is like very specific and maybe not, I don't know, I'm probably not the most knowledgeable about oil paint actually, but I think it's fine because I get like bogged down when I like feel like there's too many rules almost.
Well, there's like a curiosity and a bravery with that, and a humility with that element of your practice that I think is really necessary in the world today.
Yeah. I like to think it's blissful ignorance.
Blissful ignorance, which is the title of one of the sculptures.
Yeah,
amazing. Well, I would love to open it up for questions. If people have questions, you can raise your hand. We have about 10 minutes. Yes, sir.
I'm curious how you think about color, because you have quite a variety of colors, and some are really warm, some are really cold. How does that play into what you try to express?
With color, a lot of it I'm thinking about mood, and then I'm always trying to use it to display the lighting. So it usually starts out with how I want to light the image, and then it either like will drift towards a certain color, more based on like what the mood is that I'm feeling working on each piece. Like the red piece, which you can't see at the moment, but afterwards you can look at behind here, I had like a more intense kind of upset feeling, and it turned out very red, versus like some of these blue ones that and green that kind of have this toxic feel. I think is a little more of what I was trying to get out of some of them, if that makes sense. Yeah, mood and lighting, I feel like, is where the color comes from.
And sometimes these hidden sources of light within the painting itself that you can't see, but that light the whole piece.
Yeah, yeah.
Reflecting back to your iron work that you did in Pittsburgh, you mentioned furnace. Was that from a lost wax process where you carve it out of wax and put it was in a sand mold and then wow, they poured the iron in?
Yeah, and it was my first time doing lost wax.
Fantastic.
And yeah, if you ever are in Pittsburgh, it was like pretty affordable for a workshop like that too. So I would recommend it, because I know in New York it was really hard for us to find any way to experiment with casting metal. It's so expensive. And there it was, and they let you try anything. People made like giant things that they had to rent a U-Haul to leave with because their cars, it's so heavy. But it's all iron, and they basically are melting down hubcaps, like old hubcaps, to recycle them and pour the iron with it, which I thought was kind of cool. Yeah. Thanks.
Hi. So last night you had mentioned your connection to surrealism, but not in terms of dreams. So where do you feel like this imagery, which is very specific to you, is sourced from?
The imagery, I mean, I think a lot of it is from nature and really looking at like a lot of times I'm like zooming in and looking at flowers and basically the light I see trickling through trees and just like little sensations like that. And then I guess like a lot of the shapes my sketchbook is full of all these just like loose line drawings, which I probably should have included some of those on here, but I kind of just have this meditative approach to sketching where everything is very loose, and I never really go farther than that for the sketches for these. Like, if you can imagine this one with none of the shading and this like loop-de-loop thing happening across the page, that's probably like where the sketch for this one started, and then it kind of grew into this field of landscape type thing. So I feel like a lot of those are I get like hooked on a shape sometimes. And it's usually I find it in nature or just like walking around somewhere. Sometimes, I used to see different things when we were walking around the city. But I don't know, it could be from anywhere really. That's a hard thing to pinpoint, I think. Sorry.
So the landscape, for lack of a better word, of the composition is from your imagination. There's no maquette, there's no objects put anywhere. And so all of your knowledge of lighting and perspective and lighting and perspective, that's enough, and depth all comes from the practice, because looking at your 4th grade drawing, you actually internalized it really early, like being able to see like that. Was that something that's always been natural to you?
That's a good question. I've been wondering that myself kind of, and that's kind of why I included that image, was because
I can go back to it.
oh yeah, sorry. I think it's not back far, but yeah.
This one?
No, the next one. This one, yeah. The fingers too, but yeah, I remember drawing this, and then literally like last week I was looking through, my mom dropped off a box of like all of our old kids stuff, at our house because she's getting rid of everything now. And I found it and I was like, I remember this so vividly because I had so much fun with this lesson and ever since then I feel like I started drawing a lot more on my own, and then I started figuring out how to, like, I used to just draw pictures of animals from like magazines or something and try and draw them realistically when I was kind of getting more into drawing. And once I did this, I started shading those things and trying to like actually add depth to them. And I don't know, I've always just really enjoyed bringing depth into things and like lighting. And so I think over time, it's just something I've gotten so obsessive about that I don't necessarily need the reference for anymore. And I can almost make it up because I like,
Clearly.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like, that's when I'm out looking at things and absorbing, like that's what I pay attention to a lot of is like how light hits things and like how sometimes the way something is lit is like really emotional, and sometimes I'll be like, wow, it's so beautiful. And then Chris and I have gotten really into, or we've been dabbling in film photography the past couple years too, because I've just like wanted ways to capture these lighting situations you see out in the world, and the phone just doesn't capture it the same way. It like flattens everything. So we've
Just quick questions. One is artists that you feel like you personally engage with, not in conversation, but in, whose work you engage with, and what kind of pencils do you like to use?
Oh my gosh. Okay, I'll answer pencils first. I use a mechanical pencil for all the drawings because I don't like when I get my fingers really dirty. But I use a mechanical pencil with like 0.9, I think, like a thicker lead. And that's pretty much it for the graphite drawings, which is kind of lazy, but it's what I do. And for artists that I engage with, I mean, I would say a lot of our friends' work is very different than mine. So I don't know, I guess I'm trying to think of historical artists that I look at all kinds of things. I think it's a lot of times people whose work is very different than mine. But I think that's something I like to do in general. Like I was just on residency in France this spring, and it was my first time being in the south of France, and we got to see like so much. There's so many little art foundations sprinkled about around there, which I didn't even know. And there was like the Léger Museum and like, I don't even know. There's like a Bonnard Museum and Picasso.
But Bonnard?
Bonnard, yeah. So like, I love the Impressionists. I love the Surrealists too, like looking at their work. But I also love like a lot of sculptors. I love Louise Nevelson. I love, like, I don't know. I feel like I can never decide what is my favorite in a way, which is a little bit how I feel about my work. I'm like almost like I can't decide what one thing I want to stick with all the time. And I'm trying to change it up. So I feel like my inspiration comes from different time periods and different artists all the time, and like each year I'm like hooked on someone new, if that makes sense.
Maybe one more question and then we'll wrap up, please.
I'm really interested in your add-ons, as you call them. Can you just tell us a little more about that inspiration?
Like the sculptural element,
Yeah, that pop out, yeah.
fringe and balls and
Yes, and stamps and threads.
Yeah, I mean, especially when I'm doing a painting, because they take so long to do, I think by like the time I get the 80 to 90% done point, I'm almost getting bored of them, that I need to mess it up in a way. And so that's often when some of the sculptural things happen, because I'm like, this is starting to feel too perfect almost. And I don't know, I feel like I hate when I get bored of something, so I want to keep myself on my toes. And so a lot of times I'm like, how can I mess this up? How can I take this in a completely new direction that, I don't know, someone wouldn't expect? And it's actually hard when people come to my studio and see something like that is like almost done, because I'm like, well, it might look a little different at the end. And then they get really surprised when like there's a whole thing sticking off of it since the last time they saw. And yeah, to me, it's also related to this, like I always want to like start painting the sculptures and then start sculpting the paintings and attaching them together and making the room kind of activate as well. Like almost moving into an installation, like lightly, I guess.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, you can all come and ask your remaining questions to Alicia directly, but thank you so much for coming. This was lovely. I loved this artist talk and this conversation, and I hope you keep noticing more things about this show. It's up through October 18th, I think. Yes, October 18th. So we have the summer to spend with Alicia's work, and enjoy your Saturdays. Thank you so much.